Good afternoon, YouTube Pipers. It's Double O Rick, Double O Pipe, aka Rick. My senility is beginning to show. Um, I just put up, I don't know how to make it a short, so it's up in the same area. But it was a short video of some of the artwork I have on my wall that I did long ago. This is one I forgot to show, but it was down on the floor covered up. And that's another beach scene that looks like something my uncle would do, and that's the reason that I didn't seem to have enough creativity to do something of my own. Everything seemed to be a copy of his, and that just wasn't good enough for me. But maybe I'm still, still alive and kicking, so maybe I'll try and do it again. I think I prefer doodling and cartooning. That's how I started way back in 3rd grade. I was doing cartoons for the kids. And if you do it right, you go from cartooning to realistic. Today a lot of people don't even try. They just put marks on canvas or paper and call it art, and people buy it. I don't quite understand it, but to me, I like something that's representative. That might be old-fashioned, but that's the art I like. I grew up in the era of the illustrators, and I loved Norman Rockwell. Just loved him and wanted to do that for a living, as well as be a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor too, so I don't know. So what happened? I became a pharmacist. The poor man's doctor, I guess. And I said I would play with art on the side, which I did for several years, and sold quite a bit, and won a couple of prizes. But anyway, the thing that I used to love to paint were skies. I would go outside and I would just gaze and wonder at the sky, and maybe that's why I like blue so much, because the sky is blue and clouds. You have to have that wonder of a child still. And sometimes it's hard to reach back and feel that wonder come alive inside you again. I tried to remember that at times. And one time I kind of understood it. It was when my dad first brought us over here in '49. And he was looking for a job. And he couldn't find anything because a lot of the people he tried to get a job with said, "We don't want any limeys here." His accent, he felt got in the way back then. But he finally found a job with a group called White Stack that was the Tug Boat group around this area of Charleston. I think his background in the Royal Navy helped him with that. And he was earning 25 cents an hour. I think that was supposed to be good money back then. Everybody today probably says, "Oh my God, how'd you live?" If you'll notice, when you make a certain salary, your cost of living is about the same as what it was back then. Because when you get a raise, you'll find that the cost of living will go up, almost balancing out your raise, so that you don't really make much more. You're just, you know how that goes. Economics, I don't understand it, but there you go. But I remember he told us we could come with him one day. His boss on the tug told him that we could come on board whenever they were meeting a ship and towing it into the harbor. And I remember it being a cold morning. It was a winter day, and it was morning. The sky was filled with clouds that were rushing across, and occasionally the sun would pop out and then a cloud would cover it again. But the wind was blowing. And we had to walk out on a dock that was built over the marsh area out to where you could get on the tug. And I remember seeing the wind blow through the marsh, kind of having a rippling effect through that area, and the seagulls above us twisting and turning in the wind. And that old dock was weathered board because I kept tripping over it. There were spaces in between the boards and I kept tripping. I had little feet. I was a tiny kid. I guess I was close to 5. And we got to the gangplank where my dad met my mother and said, "You got to hurry and get on, but we're late already." So my mother had me tagging along behind her, and she walked up the gangplank. Dad helped her on board and then picked me up and put me over the gunwale. And the other guys pulled the plank up and stowed it away. And as I was walking excuse me, as I was walking along the deck, the engine started up, and you could feel the vibrations on the deck. It was just powerful motor under there, and your body kind of reverberated with it. And I think it hit me more than the others because I was a little guy, close to the deck, because I wasn't very tall at all. I forgot to get something to drink. At any rate, after Dad brought us aboard, he told us we should go down below where there was some people and they had something to eat, because he figured we had not eaten. So he had to get to whatever his job was. I don't know what he did. But anyway, he had to get to it, and the guys were throwing the ropes off of the stays. And we walked down into the innards where there was a table and 2 guys were sitting there. And they said, "Hello, hello, you must be Mrs. Alf." And she said yes. And they said, "Who's this little guy?" And she told him who I was. The whole time they were talking, I saw this plate filled with something that I'd never seen before. And I said, "What's that?" And one of the guys said, "Deviled eggs, son. Why don't you have one?" And he held the plate out for me, and it looked like something that was I had never seen it. Didn't look like something I wanted, so I said no thanks. So my mom gave me one of those triangular sandwiches that they cut in fourths. And I was eating that. We were sitting at the table, and the tug was beginning to roll as we were headed out to meet the ship that they were going to tow in. And while they were talking, I kept looking at that plate and thinking, maybe I would like to try one. So I reached over and grabbed one and got up from the seat and walked up the, I don't know, the steps, I guess you would call them. I guess they would call it a ladder. I don't know. But anyway, I got to the doorway and held on as the ship was moving and rolling. And the sea air just, I don't know, I liked it when I was a kid. I really liked it. I guess that trip across the Atlantic on the ship when we came from England to New York had kind of gotten into me, and I just enjoyed that. And as I stood there and I was looking out the gray sky and smelling the salt breeze and hearing the water rush by the sides, I shoved that thing in my mouth. And I thought that was the best thing I had ever eaten in my life. And I ran back downstairs and sat down in front of that plate. They were still talking, so I grabbed one in each hand, shoved one in my mouth, and as soon as it was in my mouth and I chewed it up, I had another one in that hand, and I shoved this one in my mouth and grabbed another one. So I was putting those babies away. I loved the taste of those things. Well, they were still talking, and I wasn't interested in what they were talking about, so I wasn't supposed to, but I climbed up the steps, deviled eggs in hand, both hands, and kind of turned to the side, and the wind hit me. As we were moving forward, the wind was moving backward. So I was standing there breathing in that and rolling with the with the deck. And I shoved one of those eggs in my mouth and grabbed hold to, there was a bar or something I was holding on to while I was edging forward to see what Dad was doing. I wasn't supposed to be out there on my own. And like I said, they were interested in what they were talking about. And so I edged forward, and whenever I got to the, well, my mind, the forward area of the tug, I was holding on to the rail, and I just all of a sudden started looking up like this, and there was a wall of steel going straight up as high as anything I'd ever seen. I'd never seen anything that high. And my dad was out there doing something, I know, and I was mesmerized by this wall of steel that was on this, was that the starboard side? And I just couldn't believe how tall that was. And I was just like this. And all of a sudden my mother grabbed me and said, "What are you doing out here?" I said, I'd never seen anything like that. I shoved that other egg in my mouth while I was looking up that. I was just completely taken by how big this thing was. I mean, it was huge. I had been on that ship on the ocean, but you know, you aren't at the bottom of the ship looking up. You're on the deck looking down, and it's not the same. Well, my dad looked over just as my mother grabbed me, and he gave her a stern look because it looked to him like I had gotten out and I was walking on that deck by myself, and that wasn't a good idea because that, like I say, the deck was rolling, and at one point I looked over and I could have touched the water with my hand. It was that close. At any rate, my mother went what could I do? And she took me back down. And when she sat me on the bench, I reached over and grabbed another egg. And as I was starting to shove it in my mouth, for some reason, the tug really rolled one time, and my stomach rolled with it. And when it went back down, my stomach stayed up here, and so did the eggs. And they came flying out of my mouth. And I got chewed up eggs all over the deck, all over the table, all over me, my shoes. And I was just sick as a dog. They told me I turned green. At any rate, I stayed inside the cabin there with my head on my elbow like this, just wanting to go home. As the deckhands were cleaning up that mess, my mother got up to clean it up, and they told her to sit back down. This was their duty to clean up messes like this. So she didn't have to. She felt like she should have, but I don't know how long it took for them to get the ship into port and come back to where we got on, but finally it came there. I had the rest of that trip, I was just like this. I think I fell asleep. My dad came in there and looked around, saw they were cleaning up that mess. He said, how many eggs did he eat? And one of the guys said, I think he ate all of them. Because there was a pot of throw up down there. Oh, I guess my stomach must have been out here with all those eggs. And no wonder, something I wasn't used to. It's rich to my system, and with the roll of that particular wave, it just all came up. At any rate, my dad picked me up, told my mother we were back at the dock and we could go home now. He carried me, and I just laid my head on his shoulder. And we walked down the plank and off toward where the car is. And I think the last thing I said to Dad before I just finally fell asleep on his shoulder was, how can something be that big, Daddy? And he said, some things just are, son. Some things just are. And I fell asleep on his shoulder, and we got to the old car that Mom called Jezebel and drove on home. That was the only time. It's the only time we ever went out. And I don't know if it's because I caused such a mess or if we were just more trouble than we were worth, but I think I would have liked to have gone back, but I think Mom had enough. At any rate, Dad worked with them for quite a while, but I don't think he was particularly happy with his job. And he was always looking for something better. And the job after the tugboats was with Armour Star, the meat packing company. They had one of those downtown Charleston. There was Armour Star on this side of the road and Swift and Company over on this side. So they had the two big brand meat packers across the street from one another. And Dad worked with Armour Star, which is a totally another story. He was with them quite a while. I think most of the time that I was in grammar school, he was with them. his boss at Armor Star told some man, as Dad was handing in a report, he said, "This is the only man I know that I could leave $1 million on this desk overnight and through the weekend while he was working, and I would know that it would still be there." That's quite a thing for somebody to say about you. Okay, eventually down the line, I'm going to talk about books. Like I said before, I like books, and there's one particular author that I want to talk about, but I need to do some background on it to see what I'm going to say, and I need to reread some of his stories. But anyway, that's something down the road. Down the road. I enjoy doing these, and I'm happy to hear that some people enjoy listening to them. So I thank you. I thank you for tuning in, as they say, and I thank you for sticking around, and I especially thank you for the comments, because I enjoy the comments, and I enjoy answering your comments. So for now, I will sign off. My finger over this button. I will sign off. I'll say God bless you until the next